Hello and welcome to my next video. In this video, we're going to explore the other extreme in terms of industrial organization, market structure, if you will, and that's monopoly. In other videos, we've looked at perfectly competitive firms and market structure. Now we're going to look at a monopoly. Again, as I've said previously in the PC videos, monopoly, you probably kind of have an understanding of what a monopoly is, but let's get down to the nitty gritty, so to speak. So, for some industry to be a monopoly, you have to have just one firm. We can all kind of agree with that and understand that part. Now, the reason there's one firm is that the product that they are producing and or selling, let's assume the seller and producer is the same, not necessarily true, but it makes it easier for analysis. That one firm is selling a good or service with no close substitutes. That there's a reason they have a monopoly. Now, speaking of that, why are there no close substitutes? Well, there may be significant barriers to entry and exit. So, such things as control of essential factors. At one time, Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, owned actually over 90% of all the bauxite known to exist in the world, and that's an important ingredient in producing aluminum. So certainly control of an essential factor or factors is important. Legal barriers. So patents, copyrights, those kind of things, those are legal barriers. And then there are natural monopolies. So natural monopoly is one that once one firm provides that good or service, that's going to be plenty enough to serve the entire market. So an example might be a bridge over a toll bridge over a river in a small rural area. There's no reason to have two duplicating bridges. Another example, and this is kind of out of date now, but say an electric company within a particular town. Used to, there were monopolies in that. That's not as much the case, so much the case now, but still holds true in a lot of locations, especially smaller areas. Now, because there's only one firm, by definition, that firm is seeing the demand curve for the entire market. They are the market in terms of the producer seller. So here's a hypothetical demand curve, and these numbers may or may not look familiar, but again, just made up. But let's recall some things. First of all, recall that the marginal revenue curve or values is derived from looking at the slope of the total revenue curve. Saying it another way, marginal revenue is equal to the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Now, with a negatively sloped demand curve, unlike a PC, a perfectly competitive environment, the monopolist, if they're going to sell more because they're facing the whole demand curve, remember the law of demand, they have to lower the price, not just for the last customer that they sell the product to, with an exception we'll talk about maybe later, but for all the customers. And so, because of this, marginal revenue will always be less, at least past the first initial point of lower, say it graphically, lower than the demand curve. So for linear demand curves, this is only true if it's a linear demand curve. Turns out that the marginal revenue curve will actually have half the slope of the demand curve in absolute value terms. We know they're going to be negative, but we want to look at the magnitude of the numbers outside the sign. So here's an example so that you can see that it's a little hard to see over here, but this is actually intersecting at 100. And then the marginal revenue curve is intersecting at 50 in this example. So marginal revenue, if you were to calculate the slopes, the slope of this is steeper than the slope of the demand curve. And it actually is half. This is half the slope of that one. We're saying that another way, marginal revenue curve slope is twice the amount of the demand curve in absolute value terms. Now, as hopefully has been drilled into you. Profit maximization doesn't change with a monopoly. Profit maximization can be determined always at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So let's look at that combination that gives us profit maximization. Well, here the demand curve and marginal revenue is not the same. Again, that's different in the PC. So we look at the point of intersection of marginal revenue with marginal cost. Well, that happens right here at this point of intersection. Now, make sure you understand this is critical. That determines the profit maximizing quantity. It does not determine the price that the monopolist will charge for the product. So that's strictly determining the profit maximizing quantity is MR equals MC. Now, at that quantity, roughly 70, what can the monopolist charge and still sell the 70? Well, that's actually read off of the demand curve. So at that quantity, we go up and hit the demand curve and go horizontally over. And so let's go to the next graph here. And so it looks like at a quantity of about 70, the monopolist would be able to charge $18 and still sell the 70. So notice that in this example, the price is well below what the marginal cost is. Looks like marginal cost and marginal revenue here is maybe $5.50 or so. So how do we determine the profits? Well, just as we did with a PC, we look at total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is price times quantity. So we're going to take $18 times the 70. That gives us $12.60. Graphically, it's the area of this rectangle. Remember, area is length times width. So that's total revenue. But to get total cost, we're going to go from the fact that average total cost times quantity is total cost. And so at the quantity that we're going to produce, we go up to the average total cost curve, then go horizontally over, and looks like that's a tad below $11. Let's say it's $10.60. So this area of this smaller rectangle in this case would be total cost. That's the shaded area. So profits would be the difference between total revenue and total cost. And so profits would be this shaded portion up here. Total revenue is this 18 times the 70. Total cost is $10.60 times the 70. Total revenue is greater than total cost, so the firm is earning an economic profit.